For decades, few beyond the Queen's inner circle even knew it existed. Hidden behind layers of tradition and trees stood a private royal sanctuary untouched by scandal, unlisted on maps, and fiercely guarded by silence. But now, this quiet refuge is at the center of a battle that has rocked the monarchy. And when William unlocked its gates, what followed devastated Prince Harry. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. There had always been murmurs of fabled retreat, nestled somewhere beyond the known royal estates, where the late Queen would retreat when the weight of the crown grew unbearable. No press, no staff chatter, not even passing mentions in official documents. Just hushed tones among the oldest palace aides who dared utter the word cottage with reverence, as if it were a chapel. But this wasn't just a story passed down like a bedtime tale for the Windsor children. There were signs, little clues, an unexplainable detour on the Queen's route, her sudden disappearances from scheduled appearances, the occasional delivery noted on a private expense record, none of it ever examined too closely. Because when it came to Her Majesty, some boundaries simply weren't questioned. Yet, in the twilight of her reign, subtle changes began to unfold. Trusted staff noticed personal belongings, photo frames, a vintage writing desk, a worn tartan blanket vanishing from public view. Items said to be moved somewhere safe. And while the world assumed these mementos had been placed in the royal archives or passed discreetly to family members, the truth was more enigmatic. They had found a new home, one that no courtier dared speak of aloud. A place the Queen herself had slowly modified, room by room, in near solitude during her final years. What began as a personal retreat transformed into something far more intentional, a space not just of comfort, but of legacy. Behind palace walls, senior aides began whispering again, not just about the cottage's existence, but about what it represented. A sacred site, one claimed to house more than furniture or sentimental treasures. It was rumored to protect a single document, a handwritten instruction by the Queen herself, drafted without the oversight of the Privy Council or any legal intermediaries. A royal act, pure and private. It wasn't mentioned in her official will, nor catalogued with state records. Instead, it was entrusted only to one, the heir apparent, William. So when William was quietly spotted arriving at a remote location near Balmoral with no official security entourage, alarm bells rang not in the press, but within palace corridors. His arrival wasn't ceremonial, and it certainly wasn't casual. No announcements were made, no photos leaked. And yet, within 24 hours, staff at Clarence House began referring to the Queen's intent. Subtly, carefully. The term was used almost like code, especially in discussions concerning young Prince George. Meanwhile, Prince Harry, thousands of miles away, remained unaware of the unraveling storm. William's sudden presence at the mysterious estate triggered a wave of speculation. Senior royal advisors began behaving differently, more deliberate in language, more guarded in tone. Something had shifted, and it wasn't political, it was deeply personal. For Harry, the unfolding developments would soon pierce through the distance and land with crushing weight, because in the heart of that hidden sanctuary lay not only the Queen's quietest secret, but also the clearest signal of her final, irrevocable decision. But as whispers gave way to confrontation, William revealed a sealed truth, one that would not only define royal succession, but crush Harry's hopes of reconciliation. Beneath centuries of secrecy, hidden among the Queen's most guarded possessions, William uncovered a signed paper sealed in Windsor blue. What it contained was not just a declaration, it was a dagger to Prince Harry's heart. It began with a quiet authorization King Charles, weary from balancing loyalty to both his sons, granted William exclusive access to the Queen's personal archive. There had always been a line few crossed. Not even the Prime Minister was privy to what lay behind the royal seal of the Queen's private safe, a chest of velvet-lined compartments secured inside the deepest recess of Balmoral. But this time, something was different. A document had been waiting. It hadn't been misfiled or forgotten. It had been placed there with purpose, sealed in an envelope marked in delicate, deliberate handwriting, private, for future sovereigns' eyes. The instruction was clear. This was not for public consumption. Not for Parliament. Not even for Charles. It was meant for the one who would shape the monarchy's next century, William. Inside the envelope lay 2 pages. The first was a note written in the Queen's signature script, steady, graceful, and unmistakable. The tone was personal, almost maternal, but it carried the full weight of the crown. In it, she acknowledged the painful fractures within the family, the era of exposure they had entered, and the legacy she intended to preserve. The second page was more formal, a property deed. But not just any deed, this one carried a quiet force, asserting ownership not just of land, but of history. The Queen had officially reserved the unnamed private cottage, her most sacred retreat, for the direct heir of the direct heir. And beneath those words, a single name had been inscribed in ink that had faded ever so slightly: George. The implication was surgical. Not Charles, not William, and certainly not Harry. George, a child barely aware of the titanic forces circling his future, had already been named guardian of a place Harry once thought of as part of his soul. The deed was countersigned by 2 of the Queen's most trusted aides, dated just months before her death. It had been intentional, final, and eerily prophetic. This wasn't a gift, it was a statement. The moment William absorbed the weight of what he'd found, he didn't celebrate. According to insiders, he was solemn, silent for hours. He understood what this meant not just for George, not just for him, but for the brother he had once considered his closest friend. Word began to trickle through the palace halls. Advisors and household staff who had long believed the Queen might have left quiet overtures for Harry were left stunned. There had been no copy shared with him, no briefing, not even a whisper. The one man who had spent his childhood trailing behind her, clinging to the belief he was her confidant, had been left in the cold. And when Harry finally learned of the document, not from family, but through a carefully leaked whisper from someone inside the firm, something inside him broke. The cottage was never mentioned in public wills or media speculation, but the private confirmation William held had sealed a future from which Harry had been irrevocably excluded. It wasn't just about property, it was about recognition. And that recognition had bypassed him entirely. But if William had the paper, Harry had the past memories, moments, and assumptions that were about to shatter in public. To Harry, the Queen's cottage wasn't just a house, it was home. The whispered stories, secret walks, the sound of her laughter echoing in quiet gardens. But what if it had all been a mirage? There was a time when Harry believed he understood the rhythm of royal life, not the one displayed for cameras, but the softer, hidden one that existed in the quiet spaces, where duty gave way to affection. After Diana's death, it was the Queen who offered that elusive comfort, not with grand gestures or public statements, but through presence. A warm glance during church, a whispered word of reassurance during chaotic engagements, and most memorably an open invitation to a place few ever saw, the cottage. Nestled in the folds of royal land, yet untouched by its politics, it became their sanctuary. It was there, Harry often recalled, that he saw her not as sovereign but as grandmother, the scent of her favourite tea wafting through the walls, her stories of childhood told in a voice gentler than anywhere else. To him, the cottage symbolised what little normalcy royalty had spared him. Years passed, but that emotional anchor never loosened. Even as he fell in love, stepped back and crossed continents, the idea of the Queen's cottage remained. Not as entitlement, but as memory one he assumed had carved itself into legacy. Royal watchers whispered about the unique bond between Harry and the Queen, that she laughed more with him, that her eyes softened when he entered a room, that he reminded her of both Diana and Philip in equal measure, wild yet loyal. It wasn't unreasonable, many believed, to assume she'd earmark something meaningful for him. Not power, not position, but a personal space, tucked away from the gaze of the firm. That assumption hardened into expectation. Meghan, too, had referenced it. In interviews, in private conversations, in moments when the future seemed uncertain. She spoke of a possible British refuge for their children, one untouched by the hostility they often faced. a place they could return to in peace. She hinted at a promise unspoken, but understood that the Queen had once made Harry feel seen, feel safe. The cottage was never spoken of directly, but its essence lingered in their plans. They had never asked for palaces or titles, just something quiet, something theirs. So when word arrived that the cottage had been named for George alone, with documents sealed, signed and delivered without Harry's knowledge, something inside him cracked. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was quiet, cold, and surgical. The warmth of decades collapsed under the weight of ink and royal decree. Not even a letter, not a note. No acknowledgement that the place where his grief had softened, where his childhood flickered back to life, had been stripped from his future like it was never his at all. The silence from the palace spoke louder than any press release, and Harry was left staring into the past, wondering how something that felt so real could vanish so easily. Now, as the crown closes ranks and documents become law, Harry begins to suspect something far more orchestrated was at play. This wasn't an accident. Behind palace smiles and royal handshakes, William was playing chess, and with a single move, he didn't just claim the Queen's cottage, he claimed the future of the monarchy. What appeared to the public as a quiet administrative formality was, in reality, a masterstroke years in the making. William, the ever-calculated heir, had long understood that modern royalty required more than blood and duty. It demanded optics, strategy, and above all, timing. His moves had been slow, deliberate, masked beneath the facade of royal routine. But behind the scenes, he was constructing something far more permanent than ceremony. He was solidifying George, not just as a child of privilege, but as the monarchy's last unshakable pillar. And the deed to the Queen's private cottage was more than a symbolic gift, it was proof of continuity. Proof that the legacy wasn't breaking, it was being refocused. The timing was no coincidence. As Republican voices grew louder, as critics questioned the relevance of royalty in a shifting world, William dropped the deed like a royal anchor. A declaration that the monarchy was not only intact, but prepared. A young heir, already positioned as the chosen guardian of the Queen's sanctuary, became the centerpiece of a new narrative. Carefully placed public outings with George began to make sense. The subtle reshaping of press coverage, the sudden increase in public appearances, each move had been laying the groundwork for this reveal. And just as Harry's truth bombs exploded across Netflix and bookstands, William's countermove landed silently, devastatingly effective. There were whispers, of course. Whispers that William had waited purposefully, that he timed the release of the Queen's private intentions to land directly in the wake of Spare's publication, that he ensured the headlines would shift from royal pain to royal preparation. It wasn't petty revenge, it was royal warfare. And while Harry spoke to cameras across oceans, William stayed silent, letting deed speak louder than any interview ever could. Behind closed doors, palisades were reportedly divided. Some saw William as preserving the crown through precision. Others felt the coldness of it all, the erasure of emotional truth beneath strategic dominance. King Charles, ever the conflicted patriarch, was said to have hesitated. He had once held hopes of reconciliation, of balance. But William's insistence, paired with growing instability in public sentiment, forced his hand. In the end, the king offered quiet approval, a nod, not a speech. And just like that, what could have been contested became consecrated. The Queen's cottage wasn't just William's win, it was George's future. Untouchable, immovable. As the firm tightened its inner circle, new lines began to form not just within the family, but across the globe. Camps were emerging. On one side, those who saw William and George as the embodiment of duty, structure, and survival. On the other, those who rallied behind Harry, the broken son, the rebel prince, the exile who dared to tell the truth. And in the middle, a monarchy at war with itself. Each revelation deepening divides, each silence more deafening than the last. As William fortified his son's destiny, Harry's inner circle began to fracture, and a deeper, darker revelation was looming. Meghan Markle wasn't just upset, she was livid. To her, this wasn't about a house. It was a message that her children would never be royal enough, never be welcomed, and never be part of the legacy she had tried to protect. the moment she learned of the Queen's cottage being formally reserved for George. Not a word, not a whisper acknowledging Archie or Lilibet. The fury was instant. It wasn't about entitlement, it was about erasure. Meghan had long suspected that no matter how many royal protocols she followed or traditions she honoured, she and her children would always be outsiders in the eyes of the firm. And now, in one cold official act, the monarchy had laid that truth bare. The Queen, in death, had spoken louder than any royal aide ever could. To Meghan, it wasn't a coincidence, it was choreography, a deliberate move to cement the bloodline and exclude those who dared to walk away from it. Sources close to the couple described the atmosphere as volatile. Meghan, on a call with Harry that reportedly lasted well over 2 hours, expressed disbelief, rage, and grief in equal measure. It wasn't just the cottage. It was the silence that came with it. No one from the palace had informed them. No courtesy, no explanation, no gesture of inclusion. It was as though Archie and Lilibet didn't exist in the Queen's imagined future of the crown. And that, to Meghan, felt less like oversight and more like a message written in ink only the family would understand. Insiders claim Meghan viewed the Queen's decision as a final coded rejection, one cloaked in formality, but laced with centuries of exclusion. She questioned, aloud and often, how a monarchy that publicly welcomed her children with titles could, in private, exclude them from the family's emotional legacy. She saw it as another example of the veiled discrimination she had endured from the very beginning, this time not whispered at a garden party, but etched into royal paper, signed, sealed, and passed directly to William. The optics were crystal clear. One heir's child welcomed into a sacred space, the others completely forgotten. Reports describe the couple's conversations as reaching a breaking point. Meghan allegedly told Harry that silence could no longer be his shield, that he could no longer afford to play the diplomat. Speak publicly, she is rumoured to have said, or lose your voice forever. There were no more fences to mend, no more peace to keep. For Meghan, the W.R. had already begun, and this was proof the palace was fighting it with smiles and silence. And then came the whispers, leaks that Meghan had already begun filming again. A second documentary, one darker, one more pointed. Where Spare had been Harry's reckoning, this would be hers. Not just about mistreatment, but about structural exclusion. About a system that handed keys to cottages with one hand and closed doors on grandchildren with the other. Her team was reportedly mobilized. Sources claimed production had started under a new working title, one that hinted at royal inheritance but was soaked in tension. But as Meghan plotted her next move, a surprising voice from within the royal fold emerged to defend the Queen's choice and deepen Harry's heartbreak. She rarely speaks, but when Princess Anne does, every syllable lands like a royal decree. And this time, her words weren't just sharp, they were final. This was never meant for anyone but George. The silence following the Queen's death had been heavy, but not empty. Behind the scenes, loyalties were shifting, allegiances being tested. And just as speculation reached fever pitch over the allocation of the Queen's private cottage, one voice, cold, authoritative, and absolute, cut through the noise. Leaks from within the palace suggested that Princess Anne, the stoic backbone of the royal family, had shared her unfiltered thoughts with close confidants. But this time, those confidants were no longer loyal to discretion. Word reached the press. And it wasn't wrapped in warmth. Anne's message was clear: sentiment has no place in succession. Royal legacy, she said, is not about who cried with the Queen, it's about who carries the burden of duty without flinching. And in that calculus, it was never going to be Harry. Anne's alleged remarks didn't just defend the Queen's decision, they fortified it. To her, the cottage was more than a building, it was a sanctuary built on service. Not a retreat for holidays, not a reward for personal closeness, but a place entrusted to the heir of the heir because of the role he was born to fill. In her eyes, Harry had chosen a different path, one of freedom, one of distance. And while the personal hurt may have been real, the responsibilities he left behind mattered more. In perhaps her most brutal phrasing, Anne is said to have drawn a sharp line between entitlement and commitment, a jab that left little to interpretation. The unspoken implication was that Harry had confused affection for inheritance, and affection in this family had never been enough to claim legacy. Her words ignited a storm. Across the UK, generational lines fractured. Older royalists applauded her firmness, hailing her as the last of the no-nonsense royals. Younger voices called her out, accusing her of elitism, of clinging to outdated bloodline doctrines that had pushed the family to the brink. Social media erupted into fierce debate. But within the palace, her stance wasn't just accepted, it was echoed. One by one, senior aides began referring to George not as the young prince, but as the future cornerstone. The language shifted, the optics changed, and with every whispered comment, George's status crystallized, his future sealed in the image of his father and now his great-aunt. For Harry, the message was unmistakable. The emotional thread he had clung to, the hope that legacy might recognize love over lineage, was shredded. He wasn't just being excluded from decisions, he was being erased from vision. Not punished, but bypassed. There would be no seat waiting for him at the long table of future plans, and no matter how loudly he cried foul, the royal machinery had already moved on. As Anne fortified the royal line, Harry realized he was no longer simply an outcast, he was an outsider to the very future he was born into. He's only a child. But to the Queen, he was the future long before the world noticed. Now, with her private decree exposed, young Prince George has been cast as the monarch's final masterpiece. Long before the world understood what was unfolding behind the palace gates, Queen Elizabeth had been quietly carving out a future most couldn't see. While the media focused on state visits and scandals, she had turned her gaze inward to a boy barely taller than the throne's armrest. George. It was never announced, never scheduled, but those close to her knew. Private invitations, walks no cameras followed. Afternoon hours stolen from public life to spend time with her great-grandson in a secluded corner of the royal estate. It wasn't formal mentoring. It was legacy in its rawest form, passed down not through decree, but presence. She saw something in George, not just birthright, but bearing, and slowly deliberate. She began placing subtle weights on his young shoulders. Within the firm, changes were already underway. Royal staff noticed George being briefed on ceremonial protocols years ahead of schedule. He was given audiences no other child his age received. He attended key meetings not officially, but observantly. And while his name rarely appeared in dispatches, his presence became more frequent at high-level events, tucked just behind William. It was never publicized, but it was strategic. The Queen's touch was everywhere, quiet, controlled, and unmistakably intentional. Then came the portrait, commissioned in her final year, completed just weeks before her passing. Few outside the inner family circle had even seen it, but whispers spoke of an image not of a child, but of a sovereign in waiting. George, dressed not in ceremonial robes, but in the muted tones of continuity. The Queen had requested it personally. She selected the artist, chose the setting, even dictated the angle of George's gaze. When asked why, she reportedly said, "So history can remember who I trusted. It wasn't art, it was prophecy." Alongside that portrait was found a handwritten note, small, elegant, and saturated with meaning. It referred to George not simply as a great-grandson, but as the heartbeat of tomorrow. That phrase alone, insiders claim, sent shivers through those who read it. It became clear the Queen wasn't just preserving the monarchy, she was moulding it, long after her reign. And as the contents of her private archives began leaking into the hands of those who would shape George's future, a deeper pattern emerged: gestures, letters, gifts, all pointing to the same conclusion: she had quietly chosen her successor's successor, and done so not with royal fanfare, but with ancestral precision. The public began drawing comparisons almost immediately. The steady poise, the quiet demeanor, the penetrating eyes that seemed to absorb everything. All echoes of a young Elizabeth called to duty long before she expected it. But where she had ascended by circumstance, George was being sculpted by design. The cottage, the portrait, the mentorship. It wasn't coincidence, it was coronation hidden in plain sight. But as the spotlight settles on George, and William consolidates the royal future, Harry's next step may upend everything once more. He stayed quiet through betrayals, snubs, and press wars. But now, Prince Harry is done. The Queen's cottage was the last straw, and his next move may expose secrets the monarchy has buried for decades. For years, he chose restraint. He tolerated character assassinations, palace leaks, and the endless suggestion that he should simply move on. But when the deeds surfaced, when the cottage that had once symbolized safety was handed, definitively and exclusively, to George, something inside him shifted. The quiet prince turned calculating. Not vindictive, strategic. Sources close to him say he began pulling out boxes he had promised himself he would never open again. Letters, cards, notes written in the Queen's unmistakable hand, and among them, messages that painted a very different picture than the narrative the palace now pushed. In those pages, she had comforted him, reassured him that his children would always have a place, promised that the crown was big enough for everyone. To Harry, those words didn't just contradict the official line, they dismantled it. He began to consider the unthinkable, releasing them, not to wound but to correct history, to show that the Queen was not the architect of his exile, but perhaps another casualty of the machinery built around her. Whispered reports claim he even consulted publishers, floating the idea of a second memoir, one narrower, sharper, aimed directly at the cold world of royal property, favoritism, and the quiet deals that never see daylight. This wouldn't be a book about childhood pain. It would be about contracts, deeds, conversations, decisions taken in the shadows, then presented as destiny, the very foundations of royal privilege. At the same time, lawyers began circling. Advisors allegedly explored whether inheritance misdirection had taken place, whether certain assets had been quietly guided without transparency or consultation. Nothing formal, not yet, but questions were forming. Questions that, if asked publicly, could force scrutiny the monarchy has always feared. Meghan, watching all of this unfold, did not urge caution. She urged clarity. Those close to them say she told Harry plainly, "There is no longer any safety in silence." "Tell it," she reportedly said, regardless of fallout. Because for her, the cost of being misunderstood had already been paid in full. Inside Buckingham Palace, the mood shifted. Not theatrical panic, but a low, steady anxiety. Advisors anticipated headlines. They prepared statements that might never be used. They examined archives, rehearsed responses, tried to predict which letters, which conversations, which truths might soon find daylight. The firm had always prided itself on being unshakable, but this felt different. Not a tabloid scandal, not gossip, documentation, emotion, memory intersecting with proof. What Harry wrestled with wasn't revenge. It was whether exposing the truth would finally free him or destroy what remained of the fragile bridge to his family. And still, each revelation he revisited, each letter he reread, pushed him closer to the edge of disclosure. Because if they were going to erase him from legacy, he would at least reclaim the story of how it happened and who allowed it. But before the final battle unfolds, a surprise twist brings the entire royal family to a moment of reckoning, one that no one saw coming. It wasn't just a cottage, it was a key. A final whisper from a monarch who understood that peace was earned, not given. And when a hidden room was discovered within its walls, the Queen's final words shattered every assumption. The renovation began quietly, without ceremony or press coverage. William, determined to preserve what the Queen had left behind for George, authorized a series of restorative efforts on the cottage, believing he was safeguarding history. But what he uncovered was something no blueprint, no official record had ever hinted at. Behind an aged bookcase in the study, a piece the Queen often insisted remain untouched, workers stumbled upon a concealed compartment. It wasn't grand or heavily protected, just carefully crafted, delicately hidden. Inside it lay a small, aged, leather-bound book, unmarked, save for a ribbon tied around its cover. It was her handwriting, her journal, the final months of Queen Elizabeth II's thoughts, penned in solitude. The entries were not official, not regal, but deeply personal. On one page, she recounted her sorrow, how the family she had devoted her life to had fractured in her twilight years. She acknowledged the cold silences, the painful departures, the headlines that replaced conversations. She mourned the distance that had grown between her grandsons, and how helpless she felt in bridging it. Yet amid the sorrow, she was unwavering in her intention. She reaffirmed her belief in George not as a boy chosen by default, but as one she had quietly studied, nurtured, and trusted to carry the crown's weight forward. Her words were clear: to preserve the monarchy is to preserve the soul of service. And in George I saw both the discipline of tradition and the quiet of destiny. But the most shocking revelation came in the form of a folded page placed separately at the back of the journal. It was addressed simply, "For Harry." William paused, conflicted, before opening it. There, in writing both loving and heartbreaking, the Queen extended a final olive branch. She acknowledged his pain and admitted that the system had often failed to protect him. She didn't reverse her decisions, nor did she question William's path. But she asked Harry to forgive, not for the crown's sake, but for his own. She urged him not to retreat into bitterness, but to find peace in the life he had chosen. "You were always brave," she wrote, "and even in your distance I never stopped praying you'd find your way back not to duty, but to peace." That message, unplanned and undisclosed, triggered something unexpected. Days later, without palace press teams or media escorts, William and Harry reportedly met alone. No aides, no photographers, no advisors, just two brothers, tired, wounded, but willing to speak. What was said remains private. Neither camp has released a statement, but insiders suggest the Queen's final words broke through where speeches and intermediaries had failed. It didn't solve everything, but it changed something. And so, in the quiet stillness of a cottage built for the future, the past found its voice, and two brothers stood on opposite sides of a legacy only one would inherit. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.